cannabidiol. You'll also hear it referred to as cannabidiol. Now, because we have so much to cover, we're going to keep our introductions brief, and hopefully if you've been listening long, you've been getting to know us as well. My name is Barb and I've been working in the licensed producer system for over 5 years, and I have extensive experience in supporting and educating patients, as well as developing patient care policy and departments. I'm joined today by my wonderful colleague, Johanthan Wierenski.
Yes, and hello everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for episode 3 in our series. As Barb said, I'm Johanthan Wierenski, and I lead up the cannabis counseling team at Canadian Cannabis Clinic, so I've counseled thousands of patients. I specialize in pain management for about 17 years, and I've studied cannabis for about 25 years. So as always, please note that Barb and I are not physicians, and we're not providing specific medical advice during this webinar series. We do have much to cover this evening, so I'll start right off with what is CBD? So as we discussed in episode 1, the primary active ingredients or molecules in cannabis are mainly the cannabinoids. And the two main cannabinoids, we work with in medical cannabis currently are delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, and cannabidiol, or CBD. It's typically about the second most prevalent cannabinoid found in cannabis, and it's one of at least 144 identified so far. That's according to Dr. Deidre Meary, whose work at the Laboratory of Cancer Biology and Cannabinoid Research in Israel is at the forefront of cannabinoid medicine research. So CBD was actually first discovered way back in 1940, but it was initially thought to be pharmaceutically inactive. So in the medical community, there is increasing focus on clinical studies due to the large number of potential medical applications for CBD. Now, before we go on, let's just review, how does CBD work as medicine? So please, again, have a listen to episode 1 for more details. But again, you can imagine that lock and key system whereby these cannabinoids are the keys which fit into the locks on the surface of the cells to create changes in the cell to trigger changes in many bodily systems. So that, in a hemp seed shell, is the endocannabinoid system in our bodies and has profound effects on bodily functions because so many systems are affected by cannabinoids. So Barb, could you again speak to the differences between CBD and THC?
Absolutely, absolutely. And as we discussed in our first episode, CBD cannabis, it doesn't have a psychoactive effect. So it doesn't create those feelings of euphoria or being high. Now, interestingly enough, and you'll be able to see hopefully with the slides there, it's nearly impossible to distinguish the difference in physical appearance between a high THC and low THC high CBD plants, and that's during the growth cycle, and also the buds, the flowers themselves. Now, there's a common misconception that CBD comes from hemp, industrial hemp, that is of poor quality. Now, just to clarify that for you, cannabis, regardless of its CBD or THC content, is essentially derived from the flower or the bud of the genus, which is cannabis. Any cannabis plant that has less than 0.3% THC, that's the psychoactive ingredient, is classified as industrial hemp. So to be clear, it's not that CBD cannabis plants are inferior or of a lower quality than THC-rich plants. It's really just easiest to view them as having different chemical and medicinal properties. So a lot of people also ask us, what is Charlotte's Web? And is it the same as CBD? Now, as we again mentioned in episode 1, a strain is simply a specific type of plant that's been specially bred for very specific properties. Charlotte's Web is a strain of cannabis that's named for a young child in the US who was one of the first to use it as CBD treatment for seizure control. It is a very low THC and high CBD strain. Now, because of the media focus on this story and this young girl named Charlotte, Charlotte's Web has now sort of become a catch-all name for any strain of cannabis that is low in THC and high CBD. But there are actually several different strains that have been named with the same properties. Some of them include Cannatonic, there's another one called Ringo's Gift, and another one called AC/DC. Now, that being said, CBD strains are relatively new compared to THC products, but growers and scientists really are looking to develop more and more strains with varying properties to really keep up with the demand. And as we're speaking of varying properties, a lot of patients do want to know, you often hear the term one-to-one when talking about CBD strains. Johanthan, perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about what a one-to-one is.
Absolutely. So a one-to-one or a balanced cannabis product contains roughly equal amounts of CBD and THC. The ratios can vary actually quite a bit between, say, 5 and 15% of either THC or CBD. And a balanced product is often suited to those who need to medicate during the day while limiting THC intake and its effects. So again, the presence of higher CBD levels can help to offset the psychoactive effects of THC. And from our experience in working with patients who've had little to no success with just CBD products, the introduction of even a small amount of THC can sometimes make a significant difference in managing symptoms. And studies are increasingly focusing on the interactions between cannabinoids and how they work together to produce that entourage effect. And this is something we will focus on in greater detail in a subsequent series. So Barb, this brings us to another very common question, and that is regarding the safety of CBD.
Absolutely. And there are certainly a number of legitimate concerns regarding cannabis use, especially recreationally. But it's generally considered extremely safe to use, and that's especially with the case of CBD. According to a preliminary World Health Organization report that was published in 2017, naturally occurring CBD is considered non-toxic, safe, and well tolerated in humans, and it is not associated with any negative public health effect or abuse potential. In fact, CBD is considered so safe that you will likely see and may already have seen CBD infused products. And these can be anything from energy drinks to cereals, cosmetics, and even pet products are currently being marketed. Now that being said, are there any serious side effects or contraindications with CBD use, Jonathan?
Yeah, well, as with any product, there can be side effects that affect a percentage of individuals. Some people may be sensitive or intolerant, not just to CBD, but cannabis in general. Some people can have hypersensitivity to something else in the plant, regardless of the THC, CBD, or other cannabinoid content. And as counselors, we've only really had a small number, and Barb could attest to that, of patients reporting noticeable feelings of unwellness for using a CBD product. And generally, when this has happened, they resolved quite promptly after discontinuing use. But in our clinics, we often see medical cannabis, and CBD especially, giving rise to fewer potential negative side effects than a number of common pharmaceuticals currently being used for certain often serious conditions by our patients. So this is particularly important because choosing a treatment plan with fewer potential side effects can help ensure a patient will follow that treatment plan and feel comfortable and safe doing so. So Barb, another question that's very important to address is, does CBD make you high? We've spoke a lot about it, but what are your insights on that one?
Well, it definitely is probably one of the most common questions that we hear as counselors. So we've talked about the psychoactive effect, that feeling of being high that you get from THC strains. Now, CBD simply does not create that same response of euphoria or abnormal thinking or feeling high. Also, interestingly enough, the unwanted side effects of THC-rich strains, things like dizziness, raised heart rate, anxiety, and loss of concentration, those have not been observed after treatment with CBD, and that's in clinical trials. Now, the reason for this is that CBD doesn't create those feelings of being high. It's due to the fact that CBD does not bind to the CB1 receptors. Simply put, you can remember we described the lock and the keys of the endocannabinoid system. And to put it simply, the CBD key, it just doesn't fit into the THC receptor lock that creates that psychoactive response. Now, that being said, patients may still experience a psychological response, including a gentle, upbeat mood, mental relaxation, but that comes more in a clear-headed and focused manner with no change in cognitive function. The effects of CBD really are felt more in terms of a physical reaction in the forms of pain reduction and muscle relaxation. This makes CBD strains ideal for individuals who are both new to cannabis or perhaps wary of that psychoactive response. It ultimately really is extremely safe, and I think that's why individuals of all ages are increasingly turning to CBD treatment. So again, if you wish to avoid those feelings of being high, low THC and high CBD is definitely going to be your best option. Now this, of course, then ties into another one of the most common questions we hear, and that's with regard to using CBD and driving.
Indeed, that is. And another question we receive all the time, as you say, because CBD is basically non-psychoactive. Most patients are able to go about their daily activities while using it without experiencing a high. However, current laws and roadside testing don't distinguish between CBD and THC, and this remains a serious issue for medical cannabis patients, especially those who use high CBD products and minimize their THC intake. And much of law enforcement is still not fully educated in medical cannabis. And as Barb said, CBD and THC strains have near identical appearance. So we advise patients not to drive or operate motorized equipment while under the influence of cannabis. I'll also mention that CBD will not appear in blood or urine screen tests designed for THC. However, with most CBD products, there remains a small percentage of THC, and that product can produce a positive result in such a drug screen, even though it can be an absolute minuscule amount of THC. So Barb, since we're talking about amounts of CBD, how much does it take for one to use?
Absolutely. And I think let's talk about how to use it before we get into the amounts. So cannabidiol or CBD can be used in numerous ways, including most traditionally inhalation, preferably using a vaporizer as opposed to smoking. It can also come as an aerosol spray or an oil that can be taken either sublingually under the tongue or in the cheek or swallowed. Oils can also be taken in capsule form and of course as dried cannabis that has been decarbed. It can also be used topically in the form of a cream on the skin, or if you don't wish to either purchase or make a cream, you can also just use the prepared oil itself. As always, we always encourage patients to start low and go slow, and to journal the amounts and the products that you're taking until you find the ideal dose for you. Another really important incentive to determining the lowest therapeutic dosage is, again, simply cost. It really just makes sense that the less medication you need and use, the more money you're going to save in the bigger picture. So that being said, on average, many patients use about 0.5 to 3 milliliters of an oil product per day. And if we're looking at dried flowers, usually less than half a gram to about 1 gram of dried cannabis total per day. Now, a lot of patients, and there's a lot of interest in mega doses of CBD, as there has been an emergence of products and very highly concentrated homemade CBD oil recipes. Now, what's interesting is that most of those recipes do not actually use low THC cannabis as the source, and they may also involve a process and ingredients that could be considered harmful and dangerous. There are many, many claims that these products may cure or prevent a number of ailments. However, there just simply needs to be more scientific research to back up those claims. And that really brings us to the next and the big question, is CBD a cure-all? And maybe Jonathan, you can speak to that.
Absolutely. And here, I'm just going to begin by saying that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that's never more true than in medical science. It's important to recognize that further studies are necessary and much research is underway, but no, CBD is not a cure-all or a panacea, but it does help a lot of people with an incredibly diverse range of symptoms and ailments. Ongoing trials in humans and animals are as well, in vitro work is investigating its behavioral and psychological effects. So CBD demonstrates neuroprotective, anti-inflammatory and analgesic, pain relieving properties, and shows potential therapeutic value in the treatment of depression, anxiety, and addiction. In fact, the World Health Organization determined that CBD has been demonstrated as an effective treatment for epilepsy, and there is at least preliminary evidence that CBD could be useful in treating the likes of Alzheimer's disease, cancer, psychosis, Parkinson's disease, and other serious conditions. So we're going to touch on major diagnoses and symptoms that CBD can be effective in managing. But Barb, you can certainly speak to one other very important patient group, and that is pediatrics in cannabis use as medicine.
Absolutely. And with the success of CBD treatment for epilepsy, parents are also looking to CBD as a potential pediatric treatment for ADHD, OCD, behaviors relating to autism, and of course chronic pain as well. Now, given the lack of psychoactive effect and low interaction with other drugs, the CBD treatment can certainly be a viable option for children. Now, ideally, children should be consuming really only low THC, high CBD products. There are some extreme cases where parents and doctors may introduce a balanced strain with a very small amount of THC to increase the efficacy of the CBD. Now, this certainly is a very difficult decision for parents to make, and not one that should be taken lightly. Parents often, out of sheer desperation or lack of access, may often source cannabis from dispensaries or online products that are unregulated, and again, sometimes even purchased illegally. Now, this is of course less than ideal for a number of reasons. any medication, especially those that are consumed by children, should be authorized by a physician and tested to ensure that it is in fact the correct strain and that CBD and THC levels are accurate. Responses to cannabis are not always the same for everyone, and it's really important to remember that what works for one child may simply not work for another. Now, because this is such an important discussion, we plan on having a special episode that is dedicated to pediatric cases. So perhaps in the meantime, we can address our next largest patient group, those who are turning to CBD for pain management. Jonathan.
Yeah, absolutely. So I speak with personal experience on this one too, Barb, as you know. So pain management and inflammation are arguably, sure, one of the largest groups of CBD users, no doubt. And this includes, of course, your arthritic pain, nerve pain, fibromyalgia, chronic pain due to injury or maybe post-surgery, as well as pain and muscle spasms associated with multiple sclerosis and other neurological conditions. So a 2017 study found that in nearly 3,000 cannabis users, of those who had reported using an opiate medication for pain in the 6 months prior to the survey, 97% agreed or strongly agreed that they were able to decrease the amount of opiates they consumed when they also used cannabis. And that is astonishing. So 81% agreed or strongly agreed that taking cannabis by itself was more effective at treating their condition than taking cannabis with opiates. So I just want to take a moment and mention here to our audience that CCC was actually created to offer Canadians the option to use cannabinoids given the situation we find our communities in due to the serious problems associated with them. So quality research is definitely finding positive conclusions, and that's in line with the overwhelming amount of anecdotal evidence we see every day. Thousands of stories with patients who were using opiates. So patients telling us that they've been able to reclaim better quality of life, that pain is reduced or eliminated and increased mobility, that they've been able to significantly reduce dependency on other medications or eliminate other medications completely. We regularly see a difference in patients between their first appointment with us and their first follow-up, and it's just a few months later. Now, I've mentioned opiates here because of their significance, of course, but Barb, can you perhaps speak to another great significant aspect of this, and that is CBD and cancer treatment?
Sure, yes. And there has certainly been a lot of talk and indeed a lot of claims that cannabis and especially CBD can either prevent or cure cancer. I can only say that this is a very delicate and sensitive subject to broach, but again, we really need to come at this from a scientific viewpoint. On the plus side, researchers now are finally gaining better access to higher quality and standardized cannabis for their studies. And for this reason, now there are a number of clinical studies that are underway. What has been determined is that cannabinoids, including CBD, may inhibit cancer cell growth by promoting what's called apoptosis, which is the programmed death of tumor cells, while also stopping blood vessel production to the tumor. Now, this to date has largely only been observed in vitro or in petri dish experiments and not in humans. Now, further to that, because cancer really describes a group of diseases involving abnormal cell growth, it is unlikely that there will be a single approach to cannabis as a remedy. Now, that being said, what we do know absolutely is that cannabis is truly an amazing medicine for many cancer and treatment-related side effects, things like nausea, vomiting, loss of appetite, pain, depression, anxiety, and insomnia. Now, of course, oils and vaporizers are always recommended over smoking to avoid exposure to carcinogens. And for cancer treatment, really your best approach, and the one that clinical research has proven to have the best results, is to combine your cannabinoid or CBD therapy along with your existing treatment as prescribed by your oncologist. So seizure control, pain management, cancer symptoms, have always been the most prevalent conditions. However, researchers are now also studying the effects of CBD on others as well, including mental health. Maybe Jonathan, you can speak to that.
Indeed, and cannabinoid treatment should only be undertaken with the involvement of a physician, psychiatrist, or other mental health professional, of course. So even low THC strains may not be suited to individuals with certain diagnoses, considering that THC can exacerbate anxiety, among other things, in some people. There are studies currently being conducted with a focus on CBD's potential as an antipsychotic in the hopes that it may prove a viable option for those that live with things like schizoaffective disorder or bipolar, for example. So many patients with anxiety anxiety will report great success in using low THC, high CBD strains. This may be due to CBD's influence on the serotonin system, which has been demonstrated across both human and animal studies quite robustly. In fact, a 2015 study concluded that CBD may help to reduce anxiety felt by people with certain specific disorders, including general anxiety disorder, panic disorder, social anxiety disorder, PTSD, and OCD, which is rather incredible. Because CBD can have a positive effect on dopamine and serotonin levels, CBD may also be a viable option as part of a treatment plan for depression. So Barb, CBD is being investigated with regard to neurodegenerative diseases, and what can you share with regards to that ongoing and promising part of this discussion?
Well, certainly with an aging population, we are definitely seeing an increase in patients who are seeking to treat neurodegenerative conditions. CBD may stimulate dopamine production in the brain, which would have a significant impact on Parkinson's symptoms. Some studies are also finding that taking CBD can help to manage behavioral symptoms of dementia and Alzheimer's, including agitation, aggression, as well as anxiety. So again, tying in with mental health there. However, more studies definitely are needed to understand whether this could actually be an effective approach. Now, we did discuss, Jonathan, how CBD can help with dopamine and serotonin production and underlying psychiatric conditions. Could then potentially CBD also be helpful with addiction issues and harm reduction?
Well, animal studies have demonstrated that CBD directly activates multiple serotonin receptors in the brain. These interactions have been implicated in the reduction of drug-seeking behavior, and this is very exciting. The most compelling conclusion that CBD is not habit-forming and doesn't decrease tolerance, so it could be an effective alternative for antidepressant medications and the ever-popular benzodiazepines in patients who are unsuccessful with such treatments. So, of course, patients who are using powerful opiates are at a greater risk for long-term dependency issues. And according to the U.S. National Institute of Drug Abuse, nearly 80% of heroin users reported using prescription opiates prior to using heroin. We all know it's a terrible situation we're faced with. So using CBD as an alternative or as in conjunction with pharmaceutical pain medication can actually help reduce this serious risk. So I might call that a potential gateway to better health, Barb.
Absolutely. And there are so many questions, and I already know we're running into question time right now. And we will be having further in-depth talks on CBD and its effectiveness in treating specific conditions and symptoms. But in the meantime, I do hope that we provided some answers and helped you to understand how CBD can be a viable option as part of your healthcare plan. So speaking of questions, let's definitely open up the floor for our question and answer session. You can submit a question in the chat window, or after the broadcast, you can also email our team at the email listed on the screen, and we'll be happy to follow up with you. So I'm going to come down to the first question, and Jonathan, I think I'm going to have you field this one. So can I only use CBD products?
Oh, yeah, for sure. So there's a very simple answer to that one. It's a resounding sort of yes. Yes, many patients and pediatric populations in particular often see excellent results from using only very low THC, high CBD products of cannabis. And this is true for many other patient populations as well. It's important to note that most CBD-rich strains will still have that very small amount of THC present, again, often less than 1%. But an amount. So THC amounts at this level are considered to be so low as to be mainly negatable. And given that CBD can diminish the psychoactive and euphoric effects of THC, there's typically little to no psychoactive effect from THC when using these products.
Absolutely. And again, it is a really great starting point when you're beginning cannabinoid therapy to really start with a low THC, high CBD product, absolutely before even introducing any THC. And it's again, great for people, again, who are new to cannabis, and again, those who want to avoid any psychoactive feelings. The next common question that we often get, and I think I got a ton of emails about this one, is where do I get it? Can I get CBD at a dispensary? Now, because CBD doesn't have that psychoactive effect, these strains, they're generally considered quite unappealing to the recreational user. So you don't usually see them sort of embraced by that particular community. Now, with the emergence of CBD as a medical option, some dispensaries are offering one-to-one strains and products and and strains that are claiming to be high CBD, especially oils. And you'll often see a lot of online illegal retailers. The concern here again is consistency, safety, clear labeling, and standardization. Products that are provided by licensed producers within the legal system really ensure that you are using CBD products and indeed medication that is verified and accurately tested for CBD and THC levels to conform with Health Canada guidelines, just as any other medication is. And so for this reason, again, we really do encourage individuals to embark on any cannabinoid treatment, and that does include CBD, under the guidance and ongoing support of a physician and clinic, using products that are legally obtained and safe to use. Now, speaking again to the safety angle, our next question coming in is actually about CBD and other medications. Can I use it with other medications?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So CBD is generally considered as having few to no interactions with other drugs. This is why many consider it to be such a valuable part of an overall treatment plan or wellness regime. But that being said, CBD and THC can affect the way some drugs are processed by the liver. For example, the breakdown of diclofenac or warfarin can be slowed, and that can lead to an increased effect and increased length of time that they remain active. So another one we often see kind of tying into this, again, what we were speaking about earlier, but can a CBD product be indica or sativa? And I'm going to field that one, Barb. So low THC, high CBD strains are generally sativas or hybrids, keeping in mind that those hybrids can be indica or sativa dominant. Now, so two popular examples are Charlotte's Web, as Barb mentioned, which is a sativa, and Cannatonic, which is a hybrid. So where are the high CBD indicas? Interestingly, high indica dominant CBD products are more prevalent among what we call the 1-to-1 or the balanced groups of products. And these will have roughly equal amounts of CBD and THC, as mentioned earlier. So strains like Pennywise or Stephen Hawking Kush or Sweet and Sour Widow are examples of those. Excellent product options are available from licensed producers as what they call patient-ready or milled, where a CBD-rich strain has been physically ground and blended with another strain to achieve a certain cannabinoid ratio, as well as other characteristics. And these are all premium quality products.
Exactly. And I'm actually just going to jump in here, Jonathan, just with two quick points. Again, just for those of you who may be new and forget, and again, I will always refer you back to episode 1 because that has all of the information you need with regard to indica and sativa and why it may be important. We did speak about cannabis being on a spectrum. Indica strains generally are considered more calming, more relaxing, often used at nighttime, whereas sativa strains, generally patients report back as having energizing properties, a little more get up and go, as patients will say, and commonly used during the daytime. So again, we do get a lot of questions from medical patients who may have a preference leaning towards indica and saying, well, why can't I find a CBD indica strain? So hopefully that's answered that question. And just because you mentioned milled products, this is something that I really wanted to bring up as well too. I have been supporting patients for a very, very long time. And one of the most common complaints that I hear from patients is that they don't like milled product. A lot of people, especially those who have a lot of experience with cannabis, don't like the thought of their medication already coming pre-ground or pre-milled, and may consider it inferior. Now, it's actually not. Now, CBD and THC levels, they still must conform and be accurate to what's on the label. The medication hasn't changed, it's just been broken down into smaller pieces. And certainly they do that to keep as much of the medicinal compounds intact. And again, those vials are tested and must conform. What's interesting is that on average, you get more medication in your vial when you're purchasing milled products because things like stems are removed in that process. So you get a little bit more bang for your buck, let's say. Another thing too that I think when you're a cannabis user, you're sort of in your own experience and to understand that there are so many people who use cannabis for so many reasons. And what's ideal about milled product or ready-made product is that we work with a lot of people who have difficulty using their hands because of pain and arthritis and inflammation. They simply cannot use a grinder or use their fingers to break up cannabis. So it's really great for them to have this just very easy to use. For individuals who are making their own oils or their own canna butter or own baked good products, it's basically there and ready to use. So again, if you ever see milled product as an option for you, don't shy away from it, because it certainly is just as effective as any medication that would come intact in the bud.
And it's the same premium product that came in bud form.
It's just smaller.
Been mixed. It's smaller.
Just smaller. Exactly. I think one of the
Let's
questions.
grab this one, Barb. Grab that one.
It's not working. Yes, and so
Yeah.
we hear from a lot of patients who have started using their medication, and we will hear from them anywhere in between 5 days to 2 to 3 weeks, saying it's not working, and why not? Which is a valid question. And many patients often are at the end of their rope, or have heard sort of these wonderful claims that CBD is going to take care of everything, and patients often hope that it's going to be that magic bullet. Now, while many patients do readily find relief very, very soon after starting, there really is no single ratio or product that's right for everyone. So for some individuals, it may take a little more exploration before finding out what's going to work best for you. It can take a bit of time before you see results. And this, again, is why we encourage starting with CBD treatment and increasing dosages appropriately. For some patients, it can take a few weeks, and that is not dissimilar from any other medication that you may be using or may be prescribed. And again, I know I harp on this every episode, guys, but this is why we really do recommend journaling your experience with CBD treatment and continuing consistently for 8 to 12 weeks, even though you may not feel any change in symptoms. If you're not noticing tangible results during your period of exploration, you certainly can reach out to our counseling team for advice on how to use your medication, perhaps any tips. You can also discuss options with your doctor at your next follow-up appointment. And of course, any changes to your treatment plan can be affected at that point. Now, many patients also ask if CBD can be used as needed, or if it needs to be taken consistently, regardless of the presence of symptoms. It makes sense. If I feel fine, why should I need to continue my medication? We're of the opinion that CBD treatment with regard to most conditions is generally considered to be most effective when taken regularly and consistently. Now, that being said, CBD can also be very effective and used as a PRN or as needed for flare-ups or breakthrough pain, muscle spasms, and seizure activity. So really, it can be used both ways. But again, we do recommend, if you are taking CBD, you want to really establish that baseline within the body.
Absolutely.
So let's see here. We have a question from Janice, and Janice has asked us, someone has told me that caffeine should be avoided within 30 minutes of taking CBD oil. Is this true?
Yeah, I'll take that. So some people who have sensitivities with caffeine might want to be careful how they onboard caffeine and their cannabis products at the same time. In many cases, it's not so much of an issue, but it can be. And generally speaking, the safest response would just be, if your intake of caffeine is within sort of that, a couple of cups to start the day, the sort of regular that most people would typically use, that's probably not going to be of any concern. However, if you are somebody who is really slamming it back all day and using high amounts of some of these oils, that might be something that you do want to speak with your doctor about.
Absolutely. So we've got another question in from Parinder. Parinder has asked, is it best to take CBD oil on an empty stomach or otherwise? And that is a great question. Generally, we recommend that you take oil products with a small amount of food. Sometimes it can just be to mask the taste, because some people just find the taste is unappealing. If you are feeling a sensitivity, most oils, again, are made with what's called a carrier oil. Most often it will be a palm oil. One company, I believe, uses an olive oil or a sunflower oil. So it may be that you may be feeling sensitivity to the carrier oil that's used. But again, even just a small amount of food, a cracker, a piece of fruit, it should be just fine. Now, if you're eating a large meal, you may want to hold off, let's say, for about 45 minutes, just to let that metabolize before you consume your oil. So really, it depends on, again, it's one of those things where cannabis is just a very individual experience. What works for you may not work for other people, but there's no harm in a little snack, I like to say.
There you go. And it takes a little exploration, of course, right? So Barb, I'm going to direct your attention over here to Colette. I'm going to take this question here.
Sure.
So Colette has written in saying, for insomnia treatment, is there an optimum ratio of THC and CBD so that you get both the restorative deep sleep and also the REM sleep, which is necessary for healthy cognitive immune functioning? So no, again, everyone is different. And while cannabis can affect various sleep cycles in a positive way for some, it always comes down to each individual's response. So this is an excellent example of the importance of proper oversight by a physician with a treatment plan like this. And that just ties into another part of this, Barb. I'll pass the rest of that one over to you.
Yeah. So about body weight. So someone asked us about body weight being a consideration when taking medication. For example, would a person who weighs 80 pounds be prescribed a smaller dose or need less cannabis than a 180 pounds person? And the answer to that is yes, often yes. When a person especially is taking cannabis in oral form, like an oil or a capsule, that can absolutely be a real factor. And again, no matter who the patient is or how much you weigh, we always recommend starting with the lowest dosage with oils, usually again 0.25 milliliters, and titrating slowly upward until that therapeutic dosage is reached and your symptoms are alleviated. So hopefully that speaks to that. Now I see on the screen here, and it's a very timely question. Someone's asked us, is there a problem carrying cannabis when you're traveling, and what is the protocol around that?
Can you speak to that
maybe
one?
Jonathan, yeah, you can definitely speak to that.
Yeah, when we get that a lot, of course. So generally speaking, Canadians traveling internationally to destinations other than the US should contact local authorities at the destination and perhaps the Canadian consulate where possible. Unplanned layovers should be considered and planned for very carefully. International travel with cannabis is generally not permitted.
And that does include the US.
Indeed, yeah, I was going to get to that for sure, yeah. So you may travel anywhere in Canada, provided you're carrying your proper documentation, which of course provides you by your licensed producer.
Traveling in Canada with medication, super easy. You can travel by plane, you can travel by boat, you can travel by train,
in fact,
any way you like.
Even easier at domestic airports now, because they used to have the police had to come over and actually check you with your medical cannabis. They don't have to do that anymore.
That's right. I traveled for the first time as a medical user recently, and I was very surprised at how simple the process was. In fact, they didn't even care. They really didn't. I showed my medication. I put it out in my in the security bin. I kept it in my carry-on, and I just had my paperwork on top of it, and they just looked at it and wished me a nice day, and I moved along. So it was
so we're making progress.
Definitely. Now, with regard to international travel, again, Jonathan.
Yeah.
I think, again, it's really important to do your research and see what the laws are in the country of destination. If you need to speak with your consulate as well. But again, definitely travel within Canada is absolutely safe. And generally, we advise patients do not cross borders with your medication internationally.
Yeah. So, Barb, in light of time, maybe we should just grab one more here.
Yeah, I think we have time for one more. Should we take Rocky's question?
By all means, I'll jump on that.
Yeah.
So Rocky writes and he says, I make my own oil now because it's expensive. I'm using Charlotte's Web strain and I save a lot of money. Great. Glad to hear it, Rocky. How should I store it? Should I keep it in the fridge or room temperature in a cabinet? Are there some strains you can recommend? Because Charlotte's Web is not necessarily easy to find. Yeah. Is it also better to have a little THC in it or just pure CBD? And Rocky says he suffers from arthritis. Thanks in advance. You guys are doing a good job.
Thanks,
Rocky. That's nice to read. So just to break this down real quick, basically, when you prepare something like that, it's going to depend on the type of carrier oil you use, right? So that's going to dictate right off the hop exactly the best storage. But effectively, what we're going to be looking at there is a cool, dark place. Keep it well closed, right? Keep the lid tightly closed. Dark place, away from sunlight, not in the fridge. Generally, that's safest. Cannatonic is an alternative as a low THC, high CBD option. But listen back to my mention of the one-to-one earlier in this episode, where we went into depth on devoted to the balanced products and how they work.
Okay. So I think, again, we'll sort of hit our wrap up now. Just a quick reminder too, for those of you who have submitted questions in chat, fear not, we've actually got a capture of your questions and they will be answered by our team. So keep an eye out for an email coming regarding that. For anyone who wants to submit questions by email after the fact, please just email us at webinar@cannabisrx.com and we'll have one of our team get back to you. Again, I do want to extend a big thanks to all of you for coming and joining us again. We really enjoyed enjoy making these presentations with you. And thank you to our amazing team behind the scenes. There are people here you don't know about who help us bring this series to you. Sean, Vijay, Andrew, as well our live counselor Megan, who's been answering questions during the chat as well. And I definitely want to thank my awesome co-host Jonathan.
Oh, thanks, Barb. Wouldn't want to do it without you.
Oh, thank you so much. And so thank you again, everyone, for joining us. It really is a pleasure. Remember, you can access this webinar and our previous episodes on YouTube. Do take a moment to subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Send us a like.
That way, you will not miss out on future episodes as well. And again, we know there's so much information, you'll probably want to listen back. Now, because of the summer schedule, our next live webinar is going to be TBA. We're not quite sure. It's maybe somewhere around the 22nd or 29th, but we will definitely send out an email blast and let you all know. And that will always be a Wednesday at 7:30. We do know that our next topic is probably going to be one of great interest, and that is going to be cannabis oils and how to use them. So again, thank you so much for myself and Jonathan for joining us, and we will see you next time. To your good health.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening.
Take care.